invited by the president of Gambia to give a lecture on reparations. He invited about 21 scholars and activists from around the world. 6 of them were from the United States. And he asked me to come over there. You can Google Gambia. I immediately accepted because if a head of a nation asks you to do something, you should at least consider it. So they gave me a plane ticket and everything else like that. Over the past 3 days, I started doing an investigation of Gambia. And I decided not to go for a number of reasons. It has a lot of human rights violations. The wife of the president of Gambia, his name is Jammeh, J-A-M-M-E-H. The wife of the president of Gambia lives here in Maryland in, I think, a $5 million mansion. $5.2 million mansion. And she's Moroccan, and her husband doesn't want her to have anything to do with the Gambian people, nothing whatsoever. He has killed his opposition leader, and he shot on his way, well, not his way, but the newspaper editor that had been editorializing against him, he killed him on his way home. He said that he will be the ruler of Gambia for this is an exact quote, 1 billion years. So if he learns how to do that, we'll see. He also said that if anybody was LGBTQ, that he would slice their throat, and has done similar things like that. So anyway, after reading this, I decided not to go, because I felt that he was using us, the scholars that he wanted to bring over, more as a puppet, to legitimize his regime. And there's a lot of people there that would be opposed to us coming over there. So only today, a few hours ago, wrote him, even though I had my plane ticket, saying I would not be able to attend. The reason why I'm mentioning that is that the countries of Africa vary from someplace like Gambia all the way to South Africa, and points in between. Some of them are incredibly stable, like Tanzania. I was there a couple of years ago, and very stable, no problems. They've had terrorist attacks there, but it's not like places like Gambia. So, and I think that what we have to understand as people in this country is how the history of Africa is directly tied to European colonialism, directly tied. Anybody know what was the first country? I'm not going to include Ethiopia because Ethiopia was never colonized. But what was the first country that liberated itself from its European colonizers? Anybody know that? Guess. Class.
Angola.
So what?
Angola.
No. Go north and then go west. Who? Who said Ghana? Who said Ghana? All right, give him a black hand. It was Ghana. What year was it in? I'm going to ask you some questions there. What year was it in? When was Ghana liberated? From who to far?
The British.
Yeah, you see, he knows all this. That's why he's walking around taking pictures. Okay, it was the British in 19 what? Anybody know that? 19. So what? 57. 1957. Who was the first prime black, ruler of Ghana in the modern era?
Nkrumah?
That's right, Kwame Nkrumah. His son now lives in Egypt, in fact. So, when somebody kind of just says Africa,
It was cool.
you got to be a little bit careful because, again, things vary from from place, time, who you're talking about, and everything else. Okay, so let me give you some facts first. Okay, the population of the entire continent of Africa is roughly 1.1 billion people, roughly. There's 1 million Chinese that live there. China has a population of 1.3 billion, and there's only about 200,000 Africans living there. So Why, I mean, I'm gonna answer this. Why is it that Chinese are moving to Africa in droves? Anybody know that? Yes. Okay, I'm gonna help you again. What's the unemployment rate in China? Guess that. United States is about 4%. What's the unemployment rate in China? Roughly. It's lower than 4%.
Yeah, it's like 2%.
Right. It's like, I think it's 1.8, almost 2%. So it's very, very low. They have far more jobs than they have people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, far more people than they have jobs. And so a lot of the Chinese government is encouraging Chinese to immigrate to all parts of Africa. And a lot of them have done that. When I was, again, in Tanzania, I have never seen so many Tanzanian Africans speaking Chinese. Because if you're in Tanzania, and I'm sure this may apply to other parts of the continent, if you're in Tanzania, make good grades, and want to go to medical school, you can go to a Chinese medical school for free if you learn Chinese.
Wow.
So a lot of people on the streets, you know, brothers are saying, I don't speak Chinese, whatever. But they talk to each other and practice that. So the Chinese know that there's not enough jobs for people, so they're going to Africa, all over the continent, making their own businesses, doing a variety of things. I'm gonna show you some of that in a minute. But there's not that many, and most of the Africans that are in China are there to stay. Most of them are there to stay. Okay, so here's some more facts. Historically, China aided in all African liberation movements. That is very important. And see, I'm not gonna be as pessimistic as you might think I would be about some of what China is doing. African-China contact was as early as 200 BCE. There's a reference by Ibn Battuta, he's a Moroccan, and he said it was, he went to China in 1345, did a lot of trade, talked about silk and how everybody wore silk from the peasant to the palace and all of this stuff. Like I said, it was the safest place he had ever traveled. And this guy had traveled all over the world by that time. In the modern era, in the late 1950s, China stepped up aid, trade, and military support, especially to Angola. I mean, if you go to Angola right now, you see a lot, streets with names in Chinese in Angola. And there was a rift, as you know, between when Russia was called the Soviet Union, and both of them at one time were helping the liberation anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. But they started splitting. China and Russia had a lot of problems with each other, and when it was the Soviet Union. So what you find historically, the Chinese started supporting more Pan-African movements, cooperation among African nations, as opposed to Russia, which just supported, they were using most African nations as proxy wars against the United States and the so-called West. So trade, this I think is one of the most telling statistics of all. If you look at trade, 1980, $1 billion of trade for the whole continent, China to the continent of Africa. 1999, 19 years later, it jumped to 6.5 billion. But then look at this, from 99 to 2005, this is a 6-year period, it more than, 7 times roughly, 6 or 7 times more. 39 billion, and finally 2012 is 163. I read a statistic now that right now it's at about $180 billion. So it's really increased a lot. And with influence, primarily financial influence, you're gonna start getting influence on government and all these other things. In general, if you look at this map, China gets a lot of its goods from a variety of places, not just confined in one place. So, 1/3 of China's oil is from Africa, Nigeria, mostly Angola, which it has a long history with. 20% of the cotton is from this area in the Sahel area. And it's sad to admit, but a lot of the countries beneath Benin, Mali, they didn't even know they could grow cotton. Because cotton requires a lot, you know, it does a lot of things to the soil. They didn't know it, and the Chinese showed them how to grow it, but they were showing them how to grow it for their own interest so they could export it. And in China, it is not conducive to growing a lot of cotton. Cote d'Ivoire, of course, you got cocoa. Who's the biggest manufacturer of cocoa in the world? Who? Nope, bigger than Hershey. Hershey's third. Who said Nestle? Give her a black hand. It's Nestle. Nestle not only owns cocoa, it owns water too. In fact, the CEO of Nestle's a few years ago said that he feels that drinking water is a privilege. And this is, when I was a child, thousands of years ago, if somebody would have told me people would routinely buy bottles of water, I would have thought they were crazy. They are doing that now. And Nestle's goal, and I'm not just, this is kind of an aside, their goal is that eventually everybody will pay for water. Hakeem Adubudi said a few years ago that eventually everybody's gonna be paying for air. And I don't doubt it, because that's the European way of doing things. Kenya, of course, coffee and fish coming from Namibia. One of my former students at FISC right now is, she's trying to set up a fish farm in Namibia, old name is Southwest Africa. And she said her biggest competition are the Chinese, who are using, you know, creating fish farms. There's a name, but what's the name for fish farm?
Aquaculture.
Fisheries, that's right, for fisheries, and they're, and aquaculture as well. And the Chinese are our biggest competition. Okay, so the important thing to know is, like, with all of this influence, primarily economic influence in China, what's going to happen? And again, I'm saying that I don't know. If you had asked me about the Chinese, let's say 15 to 20 years ago, I would say that all of their intentions in Africa are very good, were very good. Now I'm not so sure, because they're really using Africa, and I'm deliberately using the term using Africa to really expand their own influence globally. The United States uses Africa primarily for military purposes. So here, you know, we know that, what's the name of that thing Adam did? Africom. Africom was created about 10 years ago to basically use Africa as a staging base for that part of the world, primarily the so-called Middle East. China doesn't do that, although they are beginning to establish bases there. So what we've got to be aware of is that so far, China does not control the economies of any of the African nations the way the former European colonies still control the economies of the parts of Africa. Now, I did hear that, what's his name in Zimbabwe, Mugabe, that he is about to switch over to not the yen, the yuan.
Mm-hmm.
What is it, the yuan? What's the monetary unit in China?
Yuan.
You got it right.
Yuan, yeah. He's getting ready to switch over that, to switch away from the dollar and the pound and all that stuff like that. Whether or not that's gonna happen, we don't know. But it's important to know that when an economy is controlled by any outside force, that country is considered as being colonized. And it's unfortunate, if you go to West Africa, all of the banks of West Africa are still dependent on their former colonial masters. They float, in Ghana, they float the CD against the British pound. And even though the British pound, because of this Brexit vote a couple of weeks ago, is going on a nosedive. The French in Senegal, Togo, and Benin, the Africans in those countries still float their monetary units on the French franc. So so all of these countries are dependent. I believe, and it is true, it's not me just saying that, one of the reasons why Muammar Gaddafi was assassinated by Hillary Clinton, and I know people don't like me to say that, but it's true, was because he was going to create his own gold standard and, you know, flood Africa with gold because he wanted an African currency based on the gold of Africa. And that is a threat, that's a threat to the entire so-called European world. So right now, if somebody were to ask me, will China take over Africa the way the Europeans did? Again, I don't know. I think that you have to be careful about certain places where this is nearly occurring. For example, again, in Ghana, a lot of the gold in Ghana right now is being mined by the Chinese corporation. I mentioned to you about the fish and other places like that. So it's like the jury is still out on that. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, you're gonna see much more development in this area. How it's gonna go, I don't know. If I were in school right now, I would learn Chinese. And I'm not just saying that, I would probably at least take a course in Chinese, because I think if any of you have any aspirations about doing business with